Hello and welcome to the Humans versus Retirement podcast. I'm your host, Dan Haylett, and today I am so thrilled to be joined by author, behavioural finance expert and founder of the financial wellness platform Shaping Wealth, and my very, very good friend, Brian Portnoy. Now, before I introduce Brian and let him talk, I want to get into, before we get into the conversation, I want to let you guys, the listeners, know why I am super excited to have Brian with us today and have this conversation. Brian is, without doubt, one of the world's go-to experts on simplifying the complex world of money. And over the last 25 years, he's spoken across the globe to a wide variety of audiences, serving as a mentor, a leader, and a coach to thousands of people. And Brian has authored 3 amazing and award-winning books, which I have read, and they are amazing. Links to those books will be in the show notes. But it was one of those books in particular, The Geometry of Wealth, that has had such a profound impact on me and my career. And I cannot wait to dig into that a bit deeper and share some of Brian's wisdom with you today. So, as I said, Brian is the founder of Shaping Wealth, a game-changing financial wellness platform that is helping financial planners like myself across the world be better at the human side of money. Brian, a warm welcome to the Humans versus Retirement podcast.
Dan, it is my pleasure. I've been looking forward to this. You and I have been on a really fun journey over the last year or two, and I feel like we're just getting started.
100%, absolutely. I'm so excited to have this conversation, and we spoke a little bit before hitting record here, and I know what's coming up, so I can't wait to dig in. But before we do, I'd love for you just to share with the listeners a little bit about you. I know it's a long career that you've had in various roles, but I'd love just to take some brief moments to share a little about you and the journey that you've gone over the last 20 odd years.
Yeah, nobody really wants to hear someone else's CV in any detail. So, I'll just say that I've been trying to figure out a lot of things for 30 plus years now on the professional front. Started in academia, have a doctorate in social sciences where I kind of studied kind of the history and modern operations of capitalism. That big picture context makes it is very influential to me in multiple ways. And from that, entered a world of financial services and investment analytics. And about 12 years ago, really got into the world of behavioral science, so much so that I started writing books in it. I've published some books on, sort of the investment side of behavioral decision making. And then the book that you referenced, The Geometry of Wealth, more about where money fits into a meaningful life. A third book that's an edited volume with Josh Brown on the stories that we tell ourselves and others about money and how we invest it, but also why we invest it. And on the personal front, I've been married to Tracy for 22 years, 3 kids, 2 at university, and a little dog named Freddie.
And a big Steelers fan as well, for any of those NFL fans out there.
Bleed black and gold, born and raised in Pittsburgh, moved away when I left for university. But that stuck with me. And now my children are stuck as Steelers fans. But among the professional sports teams to root for in America, being able to be a Steelers fan is actually a bit of a privilege.
Excellent. So look, I really want to kick off with the conversation today, and I want to ask you, really, in your opinion, and it's very hard to maybe cover off just one thing, but in your opinion, what do you think as human beings is one of our greatest challenges when it comes to this wonderful modern made up thing called retirement?
Yeah, and let's return to that phrase "made up" because it is made up. It's one of our most important social institutions, but it is like every other social institution, just made up by human beings. And social institutions are effectively kind of equilibria that we all buy into but they aren't necessarily fixed in time. They evolve. So we could come back to that. I'll name two challenges when it comes to retirement. One is very practical and technical and mechanical, and the other is a little bit more ethereal and philosophical. Just on the practical side, not running out of money. I don't know if there's a graceful or elegant or poetic way to put it, but so much of what financial planning is about in the UK, US, Canada, elsewhere, is making sure that you have enough money for some unspecified period of time to pay the bills, keep a warm roof over your head, do the things that you need to do and the things that you want to do. So answer one of two is just very mechanical. The challenge is not running out. The second question, which is where I spend all of my time in terms of the financial wellness platform I've built that you kindly made reference to, is in a word, purpose. So we have a situation now with our modern retirement system, again, made up in the 19th century, now a little bit long in the tooth. I think we can structurally question its role and purpose and functioning. But here at this moment in time, we have retirement ages that tend to land in the 60s, 62, 65, 67, whatever the number happens to be for you. And we are living quite long relative to where we were just a generation, let alone 2 or 3 years ago. So we often have decades of life left after we quote unquote retire. And what we're seeing is a crisis. What we're seeing is a broad-based struggle among retirees to understand, maintain, and in some cases change their identity that they've had for going on 40 years. There are a few things more important to us than work. Work defines who we are. And, at least in the US, when you go to a party, someone, you meet somebody you haven't met before, what's the first question they ask? Well, what do you do? Spoiler alert, they couldn't care less what you do. My wife doesn't really know what I do. My friends don't really know what I do. Half the time, I don't know what I do. The question, what do you do, isn't a technical, it isn't give me your LinkedIn profile. It's tell me something that is deeply important about who you are so that I can maybe understand you and your identity. Mm-hmm. One way to think about retirement is that we spend 35, 40 plus years accumulating enough capital so that we could stop doing the thing that's the most important to us. And that absurdist framing is actually true. So we save so that we could stop leading a meaningful life. So what's the, I mentioned the technical piece of not running out of money. The other piece that requires guidance in terms of, our great challenge is how to retain, pivot, adapt to a new lifestyle in which we still have something very meaningful to retire with, retire for. We can talk about the distinction of retiring to something versus retiring from something. It's a huge distinction.
Absolutely.
But I'll just wrap up by saying that so much of retirement planning should focus on how do we retain a sense of meaning and purpose in the years and decades that we likely have left after we formally quit the thing that might be the most important thing to us.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I think we take our clients through a specific exercise that was really off the back of some conversations and learning that we went through, and that is one where we focus on what you're retiring from and retiring to. So many people, as you said, focus on what they're retiring from. They don't actually look at what they're retiring to. And specifically what they're retiring from, all of those non-financial aspects of work, they don't really focus on that. And then they look at kind of what they're going to, and there's this massive hole that then exists if they haven't quite figured out what makes them happy, what gives them purpose. and they often don't they often don't retain what makes them happy going into retirement, because they're letting go of that 30-40 year thing that did make them happy, and all of those non-financial things. So we spend a huge amount of time with people looking at that retiring to piece, because if you don't know what you're retiring to, how can you live a happy and healthy retirement, right?
For a living, I talk to financial advisors about how they run their practice and how they might do a little bit better. And I hear stories all the time about, sort of the big conversation or two that happens with an individual or a couple as they're in their late 50s into their early to mid to late 60s, and they are quote unquote retiring. And often there will be enough cash to pay the bill. So, problem one of two solved. You have enough to pay the bills. But then the retiree, and it's often the man, I mean, just in a traditional framework, it is the man. So deliberately gendered comment here. But someone in one of the two people in the couple, and often the man, will ask, well, what's next? So you've just spent 40 years saving for this moment, and the advisor might be ready to, uncork some champagne and, have a little bit of a party. And, there's a psychological principle known as hedonic adaptation, which is a lot of syllables, a fancy way of saying that we kind of grow accustomed to almost everything in life. And when we achieve our goals, we tend to think, okay, time to move on to the next thing. There's good evolutionary reasons for why that's true. That's probably beyond the scope of this conversation. The fact is, when you're sitting in that quote unquote celebration meeting to say, hey, you did it, you crossed the finish line, you have enough dough to do the things that you want to do, there's a bittersweet element to that conversation sometimes that surprises everybody around the table. Like, why would it be bittersweet? And the answer is that we are wired to want whatever's next. From popular show here in the States, Mad Men, the lead is he the protagonist or the antagonist? I don't know. He's complicated. But Don Draper said that happiness is that feeling right before you want more happiness. And so if you've worked 40 years to get to that meeting with your advisor at age 63 who tells you, hey, you have enough to go on those vacations or to buy that, vacation home, or to support the kids or grandkids or whatever it is, there is in many cases still the sentiment of, well, fine, but what's next? And a lot of people aren't prepared to answer that question.
Yeah, and one of the fundamental reasons why I wanted to start this podcast up is to get these conversations, which I have on a daily basis with my clients out there, into the world, because these conversations, I think, are not necessarily being had in the environments that they should be had in. I think it's financial planning and advice is too focused on the numbers and not so much on the human being. And I think, the work that you're doing is transforming those conversations, thank God, because that really is the fundamentals to living this happy retirement. I think one thing that I do want to touch on with you, Brian, is, one of the models that's really stuck with me that I know is yours and you framed amazingly well is in this kind of the pursuit of happiness is those 4 C's. And for me, for the listeners, the context of these 4 C's applies to whether you're 20 and you're 30 and you're in the midst of your career, or when you're 55, 60 and you're thinking about life after work. I'd love you to just let's have a conversation about those 4 C's, because that's had a massive impact on me personally and on the conversations I have with the clients.
Yeah, happy to. And to be clear, from a homophonic point of view, when we say 4 C's, we're not talking about oceans. We're talking about the letter C. After A, then B, then C. Yeah. There are 4 C's, and we're specifically talking about contentment, or sort of deep, meaningful joy in life. So, we can go back to Aristotle and even before him and recognize that, humans, forever have been trying to figure out, well, what is a life well lived? And fast forward from Aristotle 2,400 years ago to modern society, there's a lot of scientific, evidence-based research on what really brings deeper contentment to people's lives. And I'm distinguishing that from happiness, because in this case, happiness is sort of just sentiment or mood. You wake up, you're cheerful, you're grumpy, we'll call that happiness. I'm talking about contentment, that what I sometimes call the step back. When you step back and say, am I living the life that I want to live? Is this going at how I had hoped it would go? That's the neighborhood that we are exploring right now. And my view is that there are 4 underlying sources of contentment, the 4 C's, and those are connection, control, competence, and context. There's lots of other models out there for this. And Dan, I like to say that all models are wrong, but some are useful.
Yeah.
That's from George Box, a different
Amazing.
social scientist going back half a century. So the model that I work with and that we work to the fact that connection, control, competence, and context are the whole shooting match, as they say. And just by way of quick summary, one is, so connection is our deep need for belonging. That need for belonging isn't a nice to have. It's not, I just want to get along with people, or I have friends. It's that we're actually born tribal in nature, small t tribal, not capital T, modern political tribal. That happens after the fact. But, we are born into communities, and in some sense, we are part of a community before we become an individual. That the tribal identities that we have, the connections that we have to others, which are wildly complicated. There are 2 entire fields of science, sociology and anthropology, that are devoted to figuring out what it means to belong to a group.
Figuring out, I think, is the phrase there, isn't it? Still haven't figured it out. Figuring it out.
Yeah, because we have not just one connection or one tribe. We have multiple tribes, and some of them are sort of deeply important, like our family, and others are our sports affiliations. So it's my Pittsburgh Steelers. But we tend to have multiple overlapping and sometimes conflicting loyalties to different communities. But still, bottom line, probably the most important source of contentment is that connection or belonging. The second of 4 is control, or we might say autonomy, the sense that you want to do what you want to do in life: freedom, opportunity, liberty. All good things. You don't want people telling you what to do. You want to be control your own destiny. You also want to have the freedom and wherewithal to tell your own story, to describe who you are, however you like. So I think it's very intuitive that will be very intuitive to your listeners that sense of autonomy is deeply important to us. If we don't have that autonomy, we feel constrained. We don't feel whole. Yeah. The third of 3, which connects back to this foundational conversation about retirement, is competence, which some people might call mastery. And it's the idea that doing work that's meaningful to you defines a good life. And there's no getting around that what we do for a living does define who we are. And if we don't have that thing, and it could be a job, a vocation, a hobby, there's different ways to describe it, we feel lesser. The fourth of 4, which I call context, I think it's the vaguest of the 4, but it is not one of the other 3, so we have to talk about it. And by context, I mean that you live within the context of something bigger and more important than yourself. We know through multiple empirical studies that sense of being connected to something bigger than you gives you that deep sense that life is worth living. And I think historically, there are 2 major sources of what I call context, but we could call just purpose. And those are faith and place. So by faith, You could say religion, but you could also say spirituality, the sense that you're part of this. There's something bigger in the cosmos
Yeah.
that defines who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second thing, other than faith, is place, patriotism, hometown pride, that connection. Yes, there's some overlap with the first C, connection, but it's not so much the people, but the idea of what you are connected to, your hometown, your country. It could be love of planet and a commitment to the environment. There's many different sources of that context, but it boils down to your purpose in life is defined by something bigger than you. So those are the 4 C's. And again, all models are wrong. Some are useful. I have found that useful personally with my wife and kids and friends and family and neighbors and community. And the financial advice and that framework helpful too, because it at least plants a flag to say what is meaningful to me, and to narrow it back down to the retirement conversation. Okay, I'm 65. I'm going to stop work after 40 plus years, and I'm going to move on to what's next. Well, what's next? I would say your choices are one or some or all of those 4 C's.
Mm-hmm. Do you think? So obviously, the 4 C's act like a bit of I suppose, a barometer in that some are more in play than others at certain points in our life, etc. Do you think that if we plan this life after work amazingly well and we approach this retirement, is that the time in our lives where we've got the most opportunity to have all 4 C's working as best as they could be? Do you feel that?
No, I
No.
don't. I've actually never been asked that question, so my instinctive answer is no. Not because there's something special that happens the day that you decide to, no longer be an employee of a company, or you have your own business that you then sell and then have a lot of free time on your hands.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that when I think about, the philosophy, the theology, the literature, but also the science behind the 4 C's, they kind of come and go in
Mm-hmm.
a somewhat unpredictable way. They're sort of, it's the landscape on which you are operating. And what I always try, as we teach that model to financial advisors who then in turn share it with their clients, I always like to say that it shouldn't be thought of as a scorecard where you get a 1 to 10 on each of the 4 C's. And if you can get a 10 on connection, control, competence, and context each, and you score a 40, then you're the most content person ever. You make Aristotle look like a schmuck, right? So that's not what's going on here. It's appreciating that these things come and go, partly through our control, often not at all in our control, because we don't control many of the things in life. Life is very much, in no small part, determined by luck and the things that just happen to us or around us. I think what it does, and you made reference to this earlier, whether you're 20 or 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years old, it gives you at minimum a vocabulary to think about what's important to you, which isn't to say kind of finely tuned dials to say, oh, I'm really going to focus here on autonomy. I'm really going to focus on the control piece, and I'm going to amp that up, in Spinal Tap terms. I'm going to turn that one to 11. We have some control, but not complete control over these sorts of things. And I think it's more than good enough to just appreciate what the categories are and just see how it goes. And I'll just conclude this comment by saying that, when you think about retirement and the first C, connection, or what we also might call belonging, that will always be important to people. I think that's an evergreen thing. And we can put a work into planning for not losing connection to others. One thing that happens as we age is that we lose social connections. People move apart. People pass away. And what can we do now at whatever age we're at to put ourselves in a position where we're part of a community or multiple communities where we can maintain and extend that sense of connection?
Amazing. Yeah, I think that that conversation is one I have a lot with people. It's that going back to what we talked about a couple of minutes ago, retiring to, ensuring that you have connection and a sense of belonging at every stage of life, but particularly when you are taking that sense of belonging away from you that you've had for 30 years. And maybe you haven't tried as hard to build those social circles outside of work because you've had a pretty decent social circle inside of work. So I think it's a really important conversation to have.
Yeah, I mean, I'll throw in there because I know you're an enormous sports fan. I'm a big sports fan as well. And this isn't retirement in your 60s. This is retirement in your 20s and 30s. But when you listen to the stories that professional athletes tell about retirement from, whatever sports league they're in, a lot of the time, I would actually say most of the time, what they say they miss the most is the camaraderie, the collegiality, the team. Yes, they loved playing the game. Yes, they loved winning and striving for championships, and that's great. But I would say the real energy in conversations with retiring with former athletes is about how much they miss hanging around with the guys or the gals.
That's a really interesting comparison because you do see a lot of sportsmen that either have to retire early because of injury or do end up hanging up their gloves or boots or whatever they hang up. They often struggle, don't they? You do hear a lot of stories, that the struggle mentally that they have to adapt to a new way of life because it's been so intense and around their teammates for a period of time.
Yeah. And, for as many stories as we know about Messi or Ronaldo or LeBron James or Serena Williams, who, could live 10 more lifetimes and not run out of money, most athletes aren't that way. They will run out of money, and so they do need to find a new vocation. So they've got, at least a double whammy. One is they lose their team, and that community defined them to some extent. But then second, they've got to, sort of redefine, well, what am I going to do for a living? What is my vocation? What is my job going to be? And, if you retire with a few $1 million at age 31, that's okay. That's kind of nice in some ways, but you're 31 years old. There's only so many weeks that you can sit at home on your couch. Playing video games or traveling and seeing friends. It doesn't work out well if you think of yourself as just enjoying a life of leisure, because absent work that matters, especially at that younger age, you tend to be pretty miserable.
Yeah. So talking of miserable, if we flip that on his head and talk about happiness, and I know we've talked about contentment from a view of and you've got a wonderful phrase that hopefully we'll touch on in the next few minutes, but, funded contentment, which I think is a wonderful way of looking at life. And you have touched on that a little bit already. But if we look at happiness, do you, and I know you've done some work on this, but do you believe that money buys happiness or can or can't?
I believe that it can, in certain circumstances, under certain conditions. If the money is used to quote unquote purchase, and I put it in inverted commas because the word purchase here is pretty complicated, but if we use money to somehow buy back time, if we use money to connect to others, if we use money to generate, or not generate, but engage in experiences that are fun and meaningful and often involve other people. Yeah, money certainly can buy happiness. And in other ways, absolutely not. First of all, we're all kind of wired with a certain set point in terms of us being particularly cheerful or gloomy or something in between, and there's no amount of money that's going to change that. Also, money does not buy happiness, especially as it relates to things tied toward what some scientists would call extrinsic motivation. You know, the fancy bits and bobs, the fame, the beauty, that tends to fade quicker than we anticipate. So, does money buy happiness? You know, I have a chapter in Geometry of Wealth called Yes, No, Maybe, because this is complicated. There's a far less complicated relationship between money and sadness, which is that money is a more reliable tool to diminish or eliminate misery than it is to purchase happiness. And so that is a powerful insight also, you know, based on evidence. And it's important, Dan, to recognize that a lot of what I'm talking about, the way that you're building your practice, it's evidence-based. It doesn't mean that these are stone tablets, you know, the science of it all. But the best we can do is to explore, you know, ideas empirically, to search out evidence to support those things, as opposed to just popping off with a bunch of made up things that sound like wisdom. And so, you know, on the evidence-based front, it hasn't been studied as much, but this idea that money diminishes misery better than it purchases happiness, I think is well-founded. And, you know, I won't go too deep, but, you know, we have something called the evolutionary two-step: survive and thrive. It's who we are. Every single day you need to survive, or else game over. You don't need to thrive on any particular day. It's nice when you do, but the more important part is the first part, where like you have to survive. So to get by, to either eliminate stuff in life that we really don't like, or to build a life so that the bad stuff doesn't happen. That is probably the primary use for money in this money and happiness mix. Beyond that, you can be more sophisticated and talk about the time and the experiences and the people and the various things that money can purchase that do drive a rush, but actual deeper contentment.
Yeah, I think we definitely get the feedback from the people that we work with that kind of reflective happiness is the thing that gives them the most joy. You know, there's those, we've talked before about the experience happiness, reflective, intrinsic, extrinsic motivations that give it. It's definitely that reflective happiness that they talk about all of the time, the stuff that money has enabled them to do or to see, to give to their children or their grandchildren, and to experience those things are the things that give them the most joy and most happiness, rather than all of those shiny things. So I know it's evidence-based, but we definitely get it in the coalface, where we are speaking to clients about what makes them happy and what they want to do going forward. And it's very, very much angled towards that reflective happiness side.
But one thing I'd want to do, Dan, is encourage all of your clients and listeners and others to show themselves grace, in the sense that this is really hard.
Oh, yeah.
And we're wired for it to be very hard. Okay. So we just can't say, well, I understand these 4 sources of deep, you know, reflective happiness, and I'm just going to focus on those. And then next thing you know, you're miserable or upset about something. And I guess we could say, well, I sort of knew the answer. Like, here's the cheat sheet. It's not that complicated. And like, what the heck? No, the deal is that from an evolutionary point of view, we are wired to push forward. Otherwise, we as a species wouldn't be. We wouldn't have taken on the dominance that we do on the planet currently. So, you know, sort of, there's a great book called The Molecule of More, which is about dopamine. And it's not the only neurotransmitter that matters here. And I think you have, or will talk to my partner, Neil Bage, who knows like 1,000x what I know about the brain. But I'll just, you know, suffice it to say that that molecule of more is wired into how we operate in society. And that quest for more serves the dual purpose of achievement and misery. So it pushes us to do better.
Yeah.
But it also pushes us to want that next thing. Happiness is the feeling right before you want more happiness. And so I don't want people to walk away taking notes and saying, oh, well, these are the 4 deep sources of contentment. I'm just going to focus on those. And then they find themselves distracted or unhappy. Like, it's okay, people. Like, it's not that it's just hard. in the sense that we enter into a classroom and take an exam. It's much deeper than that. It's how we've been wired from a neurotransmitter point of view to navigate the world in which we live.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating because I think everyone kind of says, like, I need a plan, right? I need a plan, and the plan and that map. That once I've got a plan, I'm fine. But I think it was Mike Tyson that said everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face. So it's kind of, you focus on the thing, but life happens, and it's okay to be to feel off one day or off one week. It's okay to not quite get it or understand it fully or ever get it and understand it. We're doing the best that we can, and we make perfectly rational decisions in our own way that some people might say are irrational, but I know we all hate that word. But it's kind of give yourself permission and give yourself grace, as you said. I think it's an amazing point.
Yeah, and let's just make a distinction: noun versus verb, plan versus plan. It's one thing to say I want to plan. It's very different to say that I want to engage in planning.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wildly different.
Yeah.
Like life-changing difference when you go from noun to verb. To say, hey, I want to put together a plan here at age 37 or 44 so that I can retire at age 63 and have the vacation or the holiday cottage and to support the family and to do the things. It is an existential step to say, I want to engage in planning. I want to be a planner. So you take on the identity of a planner as opposed to someone who has built or purchased a plan. I don't know if it's night or day, but they're pretty far apart. And so, you're the financial advisor. I'm not, but so I don't know if the question is too harsh, too direct, to something, but hey, do you want to make a plan? Well, okay, that's fine. That sounds good. I think the answer would be yes. Do you want to engage in planning? Or maybe, to a slightly easier verb tense, do you want to be a planner? Like, yes, Dan, you're the financial planner, but you say to the client, do you want to be a planner? Are you going to be somebody who chooses to adapt when it's time to change? Because change is inevitable but unpredictable, which requires us to do the thing that has put us in good stead as a species, which is adapt. That's why at Shaping Wealth, we talk about serving the adaptive advisor and the adaptive client. If you embrace the glory of adaptation, you are living. It's awesome.
Yeah. Fantastic. Absolutely brilliant. As we wrap up, I'd love to just ask you some questions, really. Just I'm asking these of everyone on the podcast. I love chocolate, and I've tried to come up with a really fancy name for asking 3 questions. So I've come up with the Toblerone of truth.
Oh,
big fan of that.
It's kind of weird.
Yeah, it is weird. Absolutely. That's exactly what I wanted it to be.
Did you see they have to change their packaging because they make some of the chocolates outside of Switzerland so they can no longer make reference to the mountains?
Really?
Yeah. I just read this last week.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So I think funny. The box is going to look, packaging is going to look different going forward.
Less Toblerone. Damn it. Anyway, so let's go for 3 questions. Oh, no, that's fine. Let's go for 3 questions. So we've talked about this retirement thing, and we've talked about how it is an invention of us. But I'm really curious to understand, what will your retirement?
Well, so the first answer is I don't know. I'm 53. I got some time, but not that much time. What I have going for me, what I think my wife and I have going for us, is we have the 4 C's. Like, we can have a shared vocabulary, a conversation about the things that are important to us. We've got 3 kids, age 20, 18, and 16. I think a retirement we want will be that will be one where we have easy access to the kids and hopefully grandkids. I mean, this is like, you talk about chocolate. Like in the U.S., we would just call this chocolate and vanilla. Motherhood and apple pie. It does not get more complicated than that, but it's not always easy. You know, they're
No.
3 bright, thank God, healthy kids, and they're going to go wherever they go. So hopefully retirement is one in which, you know, we are able to be part of our, you know, our family's life. I've had wanderlust since I was a small boy, you know, literally age 5 or 6, like this intense interest in travel. So I do hope that there's an element of adventure and the unknown that I can indulge for as long as I'm physically able to. And I guess that might fall under the control or autonomy bucket. Kind of the labels start becoming silly, you know, when you start talking about the things that are really important to you. So, you know, between family and adventure, those would be 2 big bucket, and sometimes together, right?
Yeah.
You know, I'd like to be, because I grew up in a shitty home and lots of not good things happened, and so the idea of being an older couple who can afford to take the kids and grandkids on these family vacations that I've seen others do and have always been envious of, I would like that.
Super interesting. Thank you for sharing that with us. That's fantastic. So if I'm sitting in front of you, I'm 55. I've established that I have enough money for this retirement that I do desire. What would be your number one tip for a happy, healthy, and wealthy retirement, if you have one?
I don't know if it would be any different than what I just answered, or in making reference to, you know, this framework for the deeper sources of a contented or joyful life. I mean, I think it would be to sort of just lean in to the things that you sense are most important to you, to trust your instinct between, you know, that would distinguish between some sort of ephemeral, you know, very short-lived, you know, fun night out on the town versus being able to engage in things that just really land with you. Maybe it's time to learn to play the guitar. Maybe it's time to go on that hike in a country that you've always wanted to. Whatever it is, I would say that pick your spot, but also recognize, a la this so-called hedonic treadmill or hedonic adaptation, that whatever you choose, there's a pretty decent chance that you're going to get tired of it and want to do the next thing, which brings us back to this principle of adaptation.
Fantastic. Thank you. And so when it comes to this human versus retirement face-off that we've been talking about, the kind of battle that we have as human beings in a modern world, noisy retirement world, is there anything that I've not asked or covered that I should have done while I've got your time?
Well, it's not a matter of what you should or shouldn't have done. One, maybe I'll leave folks with this, and that is the word script. Whose script are you living? Because I think when it comes to financial planning generally and retirement planning specifically, we buy into existing scripts and say, well, this is the way it's supposed to go. And in some sense, you know, the financial planning exercise can be very, you know, sort of script oriented. So the advisor or planner talks about XYZ, and the client listens and says, okay, good, those are my choices, or this is the way I see things. This is the way I see others doing it. As you know, we do a lot of work with advisors and their clients around this principle of storytelling, and specifically on the idea of what it means to be an editor of one's own life narrative. And so if your story were written, your life story were written in pencil and not pen, and you can make it whatever you want, what would it be? I think when you look at those studies of what people regret at their very end of days, one of the big things is, I didn't really do the things that I wanted to because I was scared, or I didn't know that was possible, or I knew it was possible, but I hadn't planned for it. So, I would ask, almost start with, a pad of paper and just write on the top, whose script am I living? Make it hard. Not even like what story do I want to live, but like back yourself into a corner and ask, whose script am I living? Because to some extent we all are. Nobody's that clever. Nobody starts with a blank page, retains, and ends up with a blank page. We accumulate tons of notes from everybody else because, back to the very beginning, we are so tribal. We take on narratives from our tribes, which we would never want to veer away from because the tribe gives us identity. But maybe there's the opportunity to do something a little bit different. It's painful, it's scary. It also has the potential to unlock something that is truly wonderful.
What an amazing way to wrap up a phenomenal episode. Brian, thank you so much for your time, knowledge, wisdom. It's just been an absolute pleasure to have this conversation with you, and I know that the listeners will take so much out of it. Links to Brian's books and other resources will be in the show notes. I highly recommend The Geometry of Wealth. It's not just for people like me. It is for everybody to get a real sense of what their life's purpose is. So I highly recommend that. So thank you all for listening to the Humans versus Retirement podcast. It has been an absolute pleasure to have you with us today. Until next time, take care.